The following podcast may contain spoilers.
Hello, dear listeners. Honestly, the episode of Treading the Path of Heaven I have been most excited about thus far. Today, we are doing a new Treading the Path of Heaven, our first in the Enlightenment series, where we'll be doing a series of interviews with creators, translators, people that are important to the industry that lets us read these novels. And I am super, super honored to have the first interview that we are doing this on this show be with Deathblade, one of my personal editing or translating heroes. Deathblade?
Hi, yeah, I'm very honored. I'm really excited to be here today.
It's going to be me and Richard recording this with Deathblade today.
Hi.
Honestly, I'm just going to jump in here, so I'm going to start this off with, I think, probably the most boring question in an interview. What started your interest in translating?
Well, actually, it started as an attempt to improve my Chinese because at the time I felt like my reading ability was really lacking. And at that time I was teaching English, and I would always tell students and the parents of the students, since the students were mostly younger, I would say that in order to improve your English, it's important to read a lot if possible. And then I was thinking to myself, wait a second, I never read Chinese. So like, why am I giving that advice and then not doing it myself? And then I was thinking, well, how can I get myself to read more? And one of the main reasons that I started studying Chinese to begin with was wuxia novels. So I thought, why don't I try to... At first, I just decided, why don't I read a wuxia novel and see if I could do it? And I picked the absolute shortest novel I could find. And that was 7 Killers by Gulong. And as I was reading it, I realized, this is actually, I could translate this. It's not that hard. And so I decided to translate, to force myself to read it. And that's how it started, actually. And from then I translated another book after that, and then another book after that. And then I ended up with I Shall Seal the Heavens, which was the first real major project that led me into doing it full time.
Yeah, that was actually a perfect segue into my next question, which was going to be what caused you to pick I Shall Seal the Heavens specifically?
Well, that's a funny question. Kind of complicated story. Well, it's not too complicated. Basically, back in the day when I first started, it was kind of toward the end of the wuxia craze. So sometime in the early 2000s, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon came out in theaters in the United States, and it was really popular and sparked a huge interest in wuxia novels, including me. I was a novel reader, a translation reader at that time. And I went onto this website called SPCnet, where a lot of people were posting fan translations of those novels, and that really got me hooked into that genre. And then by the time I started doing my own translation, that scene was kind of dying away. It was, not very much interest. And it was about the same time, almost exactly the same time, within months, I think. I'd have to go back to check the exact dates, but about the same time was when He-Man started posting the translation of Stellar Transformations. And that's when the new web novel craze just hit. And then shortly after He-Man started doing Stellar Transformations, then Ren started doing Coiling Dragon. And by the time all of that started to get super popular, Ren started Wuxia World, and back in those days it was just him, and I feel like there was one other translation. Maybe it was GGP's translation, or maybe it was another one, I forget. But way back then, and I should point out that Ren also was on SPCnet. He was an admin. And so he kind of read some of my old translations, and I read some of his, and he kind of knew me, and I kind of knew him, as fellow members of this same forum. So when Ren started Wuxia World, he at one point just reached out to me and asked me if I would be interested in posting some of my translations onto his site, which they're still there. 7 Killers, like I mentioned, Heroes Shed No Tears, and Dragon King with 7 Stars. They're all old school traditional wuxia novels. And he just asked if he could put them on his website because he said he was interested in getting more interest in wuxia, and he said he was, getting a lot of traffic, and so he wanted to have more content. And then I was at the point that he contacted me. I was halfway through the fourth novel that I was translating called Dragon King with 7 Stars, and he was trying to convince me to do my next project exclusively with him. And I was like, all right, sure, that's fine. And he said, well, originally I asked him if I could do my own novel, and he said yes, but that he suggested doing a translation. And I just was like, well, what do you suggest? And he said, well, there's this novel called 我与风天, and which of course the English translation that we came up with for the title is called I Shall Seal the Heavens, although not originally. We originally were going to call it something else, but so it was just his recommendation, and he didn't like force me to or anything. He just said check it out. So I checked it out, and I read the first chapter too. It seemed kind of hard, but not too hard. And in the end, I decided that I wouldn't do my own original work. I decided to do a translation instead, and that's how it all started.
Well, can I say that I'm very happy that that was the way that history played out, because man, do I love some I Shall Sail the Heavens.
To chime in here, I'm curious, what were some of the other names you guys thought of for I Shall Sail the Heavens, since this was the one you guys went with?
Well, I'd have to go back because it's been about 2 years. But the key the key aspect that we were having trouble with is that in Chinese it literally means 我与风天. The yu character literally means to desire something, and so we were kind of struggling with how to translate that character because I think I desire to seal the heavens is kind of like pretty lame, and that just does not have it doesn't roll off the tongue. And so we kind of went back and forth. I can't remember the specifics, but I was the one that came up with shall, because I said I think it contains that meaning, which is that you really want to do something, you want to do it so much that you are going to do it, but it is something that you have yet to do. So I felt like it kind of encapsulated the same meaning as desire.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. It feels like it encapsulates Meng Hao's character as well.
Yeah, totally. The Feng Tian, the Seal the Heavens, was a bit easier. Although in retrospect, I think if I had read the entire novel, which I do have to point out, the entire novel wasn't even written when I started translating it. But if I had been able to read the entire novel, or if I'd been able to talk to the author before translating it, I don't know, I might have come up with something else, because as you guys know that, or I don't know, maybe you do or don't. I'm not sure if you read all the footnotes, but the Feng character, which I translate as seal, can also have a different meaning, and so there's like a play on words there. So I don't know. I probably would have translated it the same way either way, but I might have attempted to come up with something a little bit more clever. But I don't know. I think in the end it worked out good.
As devil's advocate, and not to turn you into a George Lucas with your past translated work, if you had that power to go back, what would you really switch it to specifically? Like, what would you debate with switching it to? Because if not I Shall Sail the Heavens, what would it be specifically? Because I've recently read all of I Shall Sail the Heavens, so I missed some of those notes.
I mean, I think it's probably impossible to really come up with a perfect word for it, and that's why I say I probably would just stick with I Shall Seal the Heavens, because the main meaning is to seal. It's just that his powers, those powers, because in Chinese the character Feng, in addition to meaning seal, it can also mean to confer, like to confer a title or to confer power. And so his art of righteous bestowal, which is how I translated it, also uses that character. And later on in the novel, it kind of, I tried to word it in English in a way that carried the same meaning, which he basically explains directly that the meaning of seal, there's a double meaning. So again, I don't think that it could have been perfectly translated. So yeah, I probably would have stuck with seal. To be honest, there's a lot of stuff especially going back way into the early chapters where, man, I can tell you, I really had no idea. Not that I didn't have any idea what I was doing, but I was very inexperienced in terms of translating, a really long novel. So there's a lot of stuff that I probably would change. And in fact, we're editing it now to be released in ebook form, and there are going to be some changes. Nothing, it's not like Meng Hao is becomes a woman or something. It's not like like major plot changes, but like there's definitely some things that I would have done differently. And I think that when the ebook version comes out, it's going to be an even higher quality read than the translation that's live on Wuxia World right now.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm excited. I'll have to check that out.
Definitely will get that.
So what is like, in your opinion, what would you say is the most iconic scene in I Shall Seal the Heavens?
Man, that most iconic scene. Jeez. I mean, that's really hard to say. I mean, there's so many chapters. I think, and I assume that probably most people who are listening to this will have already read the whole thing. And if you haven't read the whole novel, well, this is your warning that we're going to talk about spoilers. I mean, as you guys know, the full meaning of the whole Seal the Heavens thing, not only is it not really explicitly explained, but it doesn't even become clear in terms of plot development what the implications are, even down to the very end. I mean, you could talk about it for a long time because All Heaven, I mean, one of the reasons why I translated All Heaven as All Heaven, like a Taoist name, was because I wanted to make sure to have that heaven in there. Technically, it's kind of supposed to be a name, but I think it should be viewed as a Taoist name because up until the very end of the book, you don't know that it's a name. And you remember there's a cultivation level where it has All Heaven in there, and the Chinese reader would have no way of knowing that was a name. And so I felt that it was important to have heaven in there because the title is I Shall Seal the Heavens, and he literally does seal the heavens of the like little part of the universe that he lives in. And so but then again, the chapter where he first actually says that, like, I shall seal the heaven, I think it's in his core formation and tribulation, if I remember correctly. That's a pretty cool scene, like this giant hand like flying down, and he's like, ah.
I think honestly that's the one that comes to mind when I think about it. Just the first time he actually said, "I shall seal the heavens," it was just so powerful.
Yeah, it was a super cool moment. But when you look at the whole story in terms of like the entire plot of everything, that's kind of like really when he's like almost a baby in terms of overall power. But yeah, that's one that would definitely be on my list. And in fact, I solicited suggestions for art to use for the covers of the ebooks that we're gonna publish, and obviously people suggested that, and I'm really leaning toward using that. Although that will be hard for an artist to portray, I think, to do it justice at least. But I think I'm gonna try to get it done.
Exciting. Richard, do you have one that we got from Reddit?
Oh, sure. I'll give one of the suggestions from Reddit. Let's start with I pick you. Rigid Nipples from Reddit asks you, Deathblade, how and when did you meet Ren, both online and in person, and what made you stay at Wuxia World?
Well, like I mentioned before, we kind of knew each other on that forum, and he originally, I'm thinking back to exactly how it happened. I think, if I remember correctly, there was a phone call where he said, "Hey, let me give you a call. I want to talk to you." And I think it was after I had already begun to post my final translation, Dragon King with 7 stars, on Wuxia World. I think it was after that. I'm pretty sure. I can't remember exactly, but there was the phone call we had, and the funny thing was, I don't know why. Like, I hope he doesn't listen to this. He'll probably like castigate me later. But like, I like had this because his forum picture is a picture of the character, because his name comes from a character in a famous Wuxia novel, and he had his avatar as that character. He still does.
Yeah.
But the version from back then was, if I remember correctly, from an even older, like 80s version of that, an 80s TV show version of that character or something, and it looked like an old Chinese guy. So I sort of envisioned him as this like kind of old Chinese guy with the Chinese accent and stuff like that.
I think everyone did for a while until he posted a picture.
Yeah. And if you guys have seen the videos with him talking, I mean, you would never know that he's not, American. I mean, he basically grew up in America, even though he's ethnically Chinese, and he was born in China. so that was the first time we like quote unquote met. The first time we met in person was actually when I went on vacation to Vietnam, and that was just before baby Deathblade came along. He was, I think that was maybe 4 months or 5 months before he was born, and we went on a vacation to Vietnam, and that was when Ren was living and working in Vietnam, and it was completely coincidental. I had planned to go on the vacation already, and since he was there, I decided, hey, why don't we meet up? So we had a dinner there where we sat down together for the first time, and then to follow up with the end part of the question, why I chose to stay with Wuxia World. I mean, I'm not sure what exactly that's referring to, but like I don't know where I would go if I wasn't at Wuxia World. I mean, the options right now are not very like promising outside of Wuxia World, and one of the reasons why I like, I guess an ancillary point is my original novel, and I don't want to get into the details of that because it's kind of boring. But I chose to stay at Wuxia World with that because mainly because I'm lazy. Actually, like I'm familiar with Wuxia World
on the people around you, right?
Yeah. I don't feel like going out and starting my own WordPress and like doing all that stuff. It's just it's a pain. I'd rather focus on the fun stuff, you know, the writing and translating. And so that's why I think it's better to just stay put.
I like it. So more of like a fun history question. What's the story behind your handle Deathblade?
Okay, well, the story, all of these stories kind of like revolve around the same sort of like theme, and the theme is, it goes back to that website SPCnet, which was where everybody was posting the Wuxia translations back in the day. And when I went to that website to start reading those Wuxia novels, I just put my username as Deathblade because for, you know, ever since I was, I guess, I don't know, teenager or so, around high school time was when Warcraft came out. I remember playing the original Warcraft and then Warcraft 2. And when I think it was
played original Warcraft.
Yeah,
Ooh.
that's a long time ago.
I played back in the day.
Right, man, those were good times. So anyway, when StarCraft came out, that was when I started going online to play. And believe it or not, my dad's a real computer guy, and he also got into StarCraft. And like, you know, we had like a LAN network at our house. So my friends would come over to play, and that was basically my StarCraft handle from when I was a teenager. And so when I started the SPCnet account, I just was like, whatever, I'll use my StarCraft handle.
Nice.
And then I didn't even go to SPCnet for probably something like, I feel like it was like 10 years. Maybe it was probably less than that, but I didn't even log in for a long time. And then when I decided to start posting the translation of that 7 Killers novel that I talked about, I just logged into my old account since it was already there, and then just started posting. And then it just kind of, you know, one thing led to another. And by the time I Shall Seal the Heavens came along, I had already been using it for quite a while, and so I just kept using it. And if I could go back in time, I would probably pick something else. I think it's like, even back when I was a teenager, I picked it because I thought it was like sounded ridiculous, like just really kind of like over the top.
Yeah.
So if I could go back in time, I'd probably change it. But you know, it is what it is.
Well, it's become so iconic now that who can say?
I guess I'll take over with a Reddit question from here on for the next one. It's going to be 2 questions, one serious and one person who asked something that he is seriously asking.
I'm a little scared now, but go ahead.
The serious question will be, other than your own translations, what are some of your favorite novels, translated or not? And that one's from Forfade. And from the Great Powerful, his one question is, and he said serious, do you even lift? Question mark.
Okay. So I guess I'll hit the last question first. I guess that means like lifting weights or something. The only weight I lift is like my stomach as I haul it out of my chair. I've seriously gained like a lot of weight in the past several months. I haven't gained that much weight. The funny thing is, as I'm sitting here in my little office looking down on the floor next to me, I have a bunch of weightlifting equipment, which is very dusty.
It's the fate of every piece of weightlifting equipment I've ever owned.
Yeah. Actually, before Baby Deathblade came along, both me and my wife had a really like uh, regular and sort of intense workout program. And then the baby came along, and that just kind of threw everything out the window. And then like actually, I went on vacation to America after I finished I Shall Seal the Heavens. And my goal upon returning to China was I was like, I'm definitely going to start working out again, definitely. And then, and I know this sounds like an excuse, but seriously, like one thing after another happened. Like I threw my back out, and then like I hurt my side, and then like just
Oh
yeah,
no.
I know it sounds like an excuse, but I'm actually like really getting sort of like recovered completely, and I'm definitely gonna start again because I gotta shed some of these pounds. Okay, then the recommendations. I don't want to go into to like I could talk about it for a long time, I guess, but basically for the translations, I after I started translating I Shall Seal the Heavens, I had a baby and all this stuff. I have been so busy that I really haven't had a chance to read much. So as far as the current translations that are popular, most of them I haven't read other than to kind of check them out. In terms of um, older translations, I'm a big fan of the real classic wuxia novels. I'm not talking about web novels. I mean the old school Jin Yong, who also is called Louis Cha, and then Gulong and stories like that. My favorite ones, there's a trilogy by Jin Yong or Louis Cha. That trilogy is called it goes by various names. It's usually called the Condor Heroes trilogy, and you can find that translation online. The three books are called Legend of the Condor Heroes, Return of the Condor Heroes, and Heavenly Sword and Dragon Saber. That whole series is really good. My favorite one is the second book, which is Return of the Condor Heroes, and that's like one of the most popular wuxia books of all time. And incidentally, there's a professional translation of that entire trilogy coming very soon. The first book is going to be released early next year. That's the Legend of the Condor Heroes, and it's being translated by someone whose name I forgot because it's not one of the popular translators online. So that's pretty exciting. In addition to the Condor Heroes trilogy, there's a book called Sentimental Swordsman, Ruthless Sword by Gulong, and that's one of my other favorites. In terms of the non-Chinese novels, I'm a fan of the fantasy novels that everybody knows. Like Wheel of Time, I'm a big fan of, and obviously Lord of the Rings. And I was a really very prolific reader when I was in high school. I didn't do homework and I didn't pay attention in class. I just read. So I read like 50 to 100 books a year. So I've read a lot. I've read the Xanth series, and I've read
that is one of my favorite series.
Yeah. If any readers out there have not read that, you really need to go find it. I mean, that is some good stuff.
It's classic. I mean, at least like the first like 10 or so.
Yeah. I think I read the first 20 maybe. They were at my school library, my high school library, which if you know some of the content of that is not really appropriate.
Absolutely not.
I don't think any of the librarians read it. They were just like, hey, this is popular. Let's put it on the shelf. There's one other series that I definitely have to recommend. It's not as well known. I would put it in my top 3 series of all time, and that's the Barsoom series by Edgar Rice Burroughs. It's also called the John Carter of Mars series. There was a really poorly made movie that came out a few years ago based on it.
They butchered that. I've actually read some of Barsoom.
That's old school pulp fiction, and it was really influential to me as a kid. I read the whole series a couple times. It's pretty short, and you can actually get a lot of the book. Some of the books are in public domain, and you can find them at the Gutenberg Project, I believe. The first 3 are available for free. So just search for your Barsoom, Barsoom, or John Carter of Mars, and those are pretty cool too.
All right.
Man, I haven't heard John Carter of Mars in forever. Like, that is an interesting story where you just see like a regular dude from America going super ham.
Yeah, I mean, that book it was originally published in 1914, so it's over 100 years old now. And it's just cool, it's just fun adventure. There's aliens, there's swords, and like, flying ships and long rifles, and it's really, really just cool, fun stuff.
All right.
I'm gonna jump back into the I Shall Seal the Heavens side of things. Who was your favorite character in I Shall Seal the Heavens, and why is it Lord Fifth?
I mean, I've thought a lot about how to explain I Shall Seal the Heavens to people who haven't, who aren't familiar with it. And I feel like it's similar to trying to explain Doctor Who to people who haven't read it. You're like, there's this scholar and he's got this parrot and then there's a mirror. It's like, people are like, what? But one thing I in my musings about that, one thing I realized is that, I mean, I this is pretty obvious, but I think Meng Hao is the character, right? Everybody else is a secondary character at best. So if you take Meng Hao out of the picture, which, I mean, I would have to say Meng Hao, I guess, because, I sort of feel like I identify with him most as being just kind of like a regular person, kind of a nerdy person. But if you take him out, it gets really hard. I honestly am not sure who I would pick, because there's a lot of really cool characters. I think toward the end there was one that stuck out to me for some random reason, and that was his name was Yuan Jian. I think he was like the body cultivator, and he and Meng Hao. It was in the where did they meet? The Wind Realm.
Yeah.
Jeez, it's skipping my mind what I translated it as. Anyway, he was kind of a scoundrel guy, and I liked him a lot. But as far as the rest of the classic characters, it's really hard to say. They all have their good points and their downsides. What was the other? There was another. Oh, Lord Fifth. That's I mean, okay. So in Chinese, it literally uses the character for a grandfather, but that character can also be used as like a title in some ways. And like, I knew ahead of time that the whole mantra that I ended up translating as, have faith or whatever. I knew that have faith thing was coming. And so I intentionally decided to use a Lord to go with that, because I felt like it would resonate with people, which I think it worked in that sense. And after that, I've actually taken to translating that character as Lord more often in other situations, because I think the reason or the feeling behind it is supposed to be like something that something grand. And as opposed to Grandpa, like if he was Grandpa Fifth, I feel like that would come across as extremely creepy, like considering what he does. Like nobody wants a grandpa that is like that. So I feel like calling him Lord would be better. And in terms of why it's Lord Fifth and Lord Third, that is, nobody knows that except for Argun. And I didn't ask him directly about that. I don't know. I didn't think to, but one thing that he mentioned, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but there's a contest that went on to bring a fan to China to meet him, which that's still going on. It just everything that has happened in the scene recently has caused like a lot of things to slow down, but that is going to happen. And in Argun's own introductory words, he said that he would provide secret details about Lord Third and Lord Fifth. So I'm actually looking forward. I hope that I get invited to that meeting when it happens, because I want to know.
Now, are you allowed to spoil those secret details for those plebs like us that won't get to hear that special secret information?
Well, that'll be up to him. If he gives me the go ahead, then definitely.
I can hope. I have a question for you. Let me we'll pull that up from him. And this is from Skyneto. And I think this is pretty poignant since you were speaking about Argun. If you had to choose any other novel to translate that wasn't written by Argun, which one would it be?
Wow, that's a hard question, because the thing is, I'm not very familiar with the content in Chinese. Like, these novels are really long, and it would be hard for me personally. I mean, I read pretty fast, but I don't read that fast. It would be a challenge to go through a huge novel in English with my current schedule, let alone Chinese, because I read probably at half the speed I do in English when I read Chinese. So other than kind of just like random things I've heard, it's really hard to say. Based on my current understanding, Argun tends to be a little bit superior in terms of his writing ability. Like he tends to sound a little bit more literary in some ways. So if I was going to pick somebody else, like let's say that there were no translations and I could pick I eat tomatoes or I could pick Tangjia Sanshao or something, I'd probably pick one of the top ones, and I would probably go with somebody like I eat tomatoes, because from what I understand, it's in a lot of ways easier to translate their stuff because it's not as complicated.
Yeah, I'm constantly marveled at your ability to capture Argan's eloquence. So like, I could understand why you'd want to move in that direction.
I appreciate that. I mean, the other option would be to do the opposite and try to find. I mean, like for example, however good Argan is, he's still a web novelist, and Jin Yong is a real author, and it's been a really long time since I read any of the translations of his work, so I can't comment on the quality of the translations that exist on the web. But his Chinese is so complicated because he writes in a style that's like similar to ancient Chinese, and I can't even read it. Like I have some of his books on my shelf, and I try to read it, and I just can't barely get through a couple lines. So the other option would be to try to push my ability even beyond what it is now and pick something even harder than Argan.
Break through to the next level of translation.
Yeah, so I'd have to consider which to do.
To chime in with a quick follow-up question there, because of the difficulty of Chinese and translating it over to English, I'm both marveled how you're able to convey in your writing, in your translations, the humor in I Shall See the Heavens and Now Will Eternal, when you things don't directly translate and stuff of that nature. Like, how are you like getting the general gist of a comedic situation and then writing it in your own words to put out, or are they able to easily translate over and still be funny?
It's a mix of the two. I mean, there's kind of two types of humor in my opinion, at least in terms of the translation. One is the situational humor, which is, like a funny situation, and that, I don't think really needs to be finessed very much. It's like when somebody falls down the stairs, like that's funny to anybody in any culture. Okay, as long as they don't get hurt. Sorry, it's funny just based on what's happening. And then there's the things that have to do with language, and especially the dialogue. Like when the characters say funny things, I feel like. I mean, again, I don't really know. It's hard for me to judge how my own translation is. So I appreciate you saying that it's funny, and I really try to make that happen because I talked about this with Argan, actually, this kind of general concept. He and I are on the same page, and I was really delighted when I heard him say this because I didn't solicit it. He just randomly said it. He basically said that the translations should elicit the same like emotional responses in people as the original Chinese. And I could talk about this for a really long time. My theory, or you could say my Tao of translation, is I feel like that's the most important thing. Is that the readers sort of experience the same thing that the reader does in the original language. And that's why I'm not a fan. I just made this big kind of rant earlier this morning in the A Will Eternal Discord server about this. What's more important is that I think that the readers experience the same thing that the Chinese readers do. And so that's why when the translation's really literal and stuff, I feel like that's a disservice to the reader, and it's not fair to the author because the ideas that the author wants to get across aren't coming across. And so with the humor, sorry, I took a long way around to answer your question, but with the humor, the situational stuff is easy, but with the dialogue-based and the wordplay-based stuff, I do tend to reword it. Not reword it, but like word it in a way that is funny that I hope is funny to the reader, as opposed to a direct translation of the Chinese. It's just how Chinese is different. Chinese people think differently, and the language itself is very different than English. In a lot of ways, the vocabulary used in Chinese is a lot there's a lot more limited than in English. And Chinese has this huge reservoir of idioms and things like that and cultural references. But in terms of just the everyday vocabulary, especially the vocabulary that comes across in these kind of novels, and I'm not talking about the Tao stuff. I'm just talking about the comedic situations. The vocabulary is relatively small and it can get repetitive. So I try to mix things up, and I try to pick things that people will find funny. I'll give you an example, which is in I Shall Seal the Heavens. So Lord Fifth will often use bitch in yeah. And in Chinese, he doesn't use that word. In Chinese, he uses the word your sister, and yeah, but and so like I could have translated that, and most translators do. Most translators translate the like your sister, your grandmother thing, and the thing is like it is funny to English native English speakers, but it's funny for the wrong reason, in my opinion. It's funny because it sounds like silly, right? But in Chinese, it does not sound silly. Like to say like your sister, like if you're doing it with in my opinion, it's exactly like bitch. Like if you're with your friends and you're like, what up, bitch? Like it's like, haha, cool. But if you say that to somebody you don't know with the wrong tone, it's like really offensive. And it's the same with that your sister thing. Like depending on how you use it and who you use it with, it can be really offensive, and it doesn't sound funny just because it sounds silly. So I tend to get a little bit more like what I would say like native in terms of the English side and less literal to try to carry across that humor.
Well, you've hit on all nine, sir, so I really appreciate the work you do.
Out of all the books of this genre that I read, I Shall Seal the Heavens and Will Eternal has me like laughing in stitches more often than any of the other books. So,
well, I'm glad, because there's some really funny stuff there, and I laugh out loud when I read it in Chinese, and I just hope that people do the same when they read it in English.
So this is just more of a curiosity on my part. At what point during the story of I Shall Seal the Heavens did you read the ending of I Shall Seal the Heavens?
Wow, that's this is some exclusive information, because nobody's ever asked me. I've never told anybody. So when I started, when I very first started the translation, I started doing it as I was reading it, and I very quickly realized that was not good, and so I started reading ahead, and that was way back in the beginning. I was only doing something like 5 or 7 chapters a week. I think I started with 5. And I was able to get quickly maybe like 100 chapters ahead. But then, I started increasing the chapter count, and then, had a baby and all that stuff. And it rapidly, devolved. I was always ahead of the translation, and at most of the time throughout the novel, I was about 50 to 100 chapters ahead. But as it got toward the end, like down to the last, like, maybe 200 chapters, I was really falling behind, to the point where there was I would say it was around the 13 or 1400s, where I woke up one morning and I was like, wow, I haven't read the chapter I'm supposed to translate today. That was like a very dark day for me. And
oh man,
yeah, it was pretty bad. So starting around then, I changed my mentality and my daily schedule. And what I did was I started reading however many chapters I translated that day. Well, it started out because I hadn't read ahead at all. So I had to translate, like, let's say 3 chapters. So I read those 3 chapters before I started translating. And then, then I got to work. And then I kept doing that every single day. And then what I would do is I would add, like, let's say I translated 3 chapters, I would read 4. And then on the weekends, I would try to read a couple chapters. And so I built up ahead slowly. And so to answer your question, I actually read the final chapter when I was on the plane to go meet Argun in person, which was only a few weeks before I finished the novel. Now, and let me just clarify that. Like, I had gone ahead to like scan the chapter, like, and I knew the ending based on reading the summaries in Chinese and stuff. But the first time I actually read it was that time, only a few weeks before the end.
And that's
that's amazing. But to chime in on that ending, how did you feel when you read that last chapter? Was it like a feeling of euphoria, or was it like or how about when you published that finished translating the last chapter? How did you feel?
It was, I don't know, it was when I finished reading it, it was sort of like a relief, like, because and another thing was, so we all know the ending line with Chu Yuan. And I had read that part, way long time ago. I read the entire end chapter, but the thing was, I didn't really understand it when I read it. Like, I didn't quite get the point. And so I had been waiting for that entire time to read it in context. And it was really cool. I was like, oh, okay, now I finally get it. And I was just like, I was relieved. I was like happy. I was a little bit sad. I was relieved. And then in terms of when I actually translated it, it was like a really weird feeling. It was like, I was just like, wow, like, over 1,600 chapters, 2 years of my life. Wow, I'm finally finished. It was kind of bizarre. I kind of laid on the couch and was just like stared up at the ceiling for a while.
Well, you have a question, Kenny, or can I follow up with another Reddit question before we?
What's the first con that comes to mind that Meng Hao ran? Like, what out of all of Meng Hao's cons, which one's like your favorite, or the one that comes to mind first?
I mean, the one that comes to mind first is the very first one in the novel, I think, or I guess it would be the little shop he sets up. It's just like, it's so. I think that's a pretty iconic scene. I'd like to see that illustrated. I mean, well, it is illustrated. I don't know if you guys know, there's a comic version, a manhwa version that's out, and that scene is in there. And the scene in the manhwa version is not that amazing. The artist is not like, a super like famous artist, but I would like to see it well illustrated. Just so hilarious to me with his like homemade banner and everything.
Yeah, no, that was one of the few stories we told when we reviewed I Shall Seal the Heavens, because it's just so funny.
That story literally hooked me into finishing this novel. Like, I got to that point while reading it, and I was like, "This is amazing."
There was another one. There's two. If I remember correctly, there was this one where it was when he was in the Milky Way Sea, and like they were like checking like how many demon hearts he had, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure it was in that scene where somebody literally like passes out from shock. It like falls over on his face. And like the levels of shock in those chapters were like just amazing.
Well, Richard, do we have any more Reddit questions?
Oh yeah, there's a couple. I'm gonna get these knocked out, and it's funny. Well, let me read that. It's VVOVV_ and Forfeit kind of asks the same kind of question. Forfeit asks, he was like, "What are some of your favorite like tropes? What are in web novels?" And VVOVV_ asks, in light novels and web novels, what are the tropes that make you facepalm, that make you want to consider dropping the novel?
Oh, that's interesting. All right, let me think for a second. Can you guys cut this audio out if I take like a minute to think?
Oh yeah, I'll edit it and I'll make it like real snappy.
Okay, let me think about this for a second. That's a hard question. Okay. I never even thought about it before. Okay, well, that's a hard question. I think, like, I've been sort of immersed in Chinese culture for such a long time that, to be honest, a lot of the things that might jump out to people who are not familiar with Chinese culture and language, to me, they kind of just sort of roll off my back, I think. And actually, this kind of goes back to, I'm going to sort of shift this answer a little bit, because I can't think of anything off of the top of my head that jumps out to me that sort of like grates on me in Chinese. But what does grate on me is when there are things that get translated in what I feel to be a wrong way. And I guess I shouldn't say wrong, but let's say a way that's different from the way that I would do it. Not to say that I feel like I am right in every situation, but there are some really common things in the novels that I see translated wrong that really just drive me like crazy. Because, we were just talking about how it's important to get the feeling of the Chinese across. Yeah. And there are some times when I feel like the translators miss the mark so bad that it's really sad. Like, one of the ones that drives me crazy absolutely the most is the whole I, your father thing. And like the thing is that, like, you can look it up in the dictionary, and in some of the Chinese to English dictionaries, that expression will actually come out, in the dictionary as I, your father, because literally it does mean that. But I feel like it sounds really awkward, and it doesn't sound cool at all. But in Chinese, it sounds really cool and kind of like badass. It's like something that a guy in like a bar would say to somebody, like while threatening to punch him in the face for something he said. But like if you're in a bar in America like some guy is like annoying you and you're like, I, your father, will punch you in the face. Like, I don't think anybody's going to take you very seriously. And so I feel like those are the things that really annoy me when I see that kind of stuff. Just makes me like kind of roll my eyes. And then on the other hand, I guess I could talk about, well, I don't want to get too much into Chinese culture because I think we're already, going kind of over time here a little bit, and I think there's more questions. But basically, there are some aspects of Chinese culture that kind of frustrate me, having lived here for such a long time. And so when I see those like attitudes and things like in the novels, they kind of annoy me. But that's a really complicated topic to get into in just a couple minutes.
That's fair.
I would buy somebody a drink if I was in a bar here and someone said, I, your father, will mess you up. I would buy them a drink. I'm like, that's incredible, guy. Calm down.
Oh.
What's funny is I've actually used that in Chinese on people in China. Not very often, only a couple of times. And I think they were like super shocked to hear a foreigner say it.
That's awesome.
It'd be like, I don't know. I don't know what the equivalent would be, but it would be kind of like, if you saw some like Chinese guy that had an accent just bust out some like really like hardcore like cussing, you would just be like, whoa.
That would be incredible. I would buy that guy a drink too. All right, I got a few more because Fourth Aid actually had a lot of questions for you, Deathblade. So I'm going to keep going with it.
All right, bring them on.
Let's see. Fourth Aid asks, do you have any tips or tricks for learning a new language?
Yeah, I mean, I have an FAQ on Wuxia World about learning Chinese, so check that out. But if I was going to distill it down into a couple words, I would say that the two most important things are maintaining a schedule and putting in hard work. I know it sounds silly, but it requires a lot of work, and you really need to do it every day, especially with Chinese. I think other languages that are more similar to English, like Spanish or French or something, are probably a lot easier in certain ways. Chinese is definitely not a very easy language, especially if you bring reading into the picture. So you gotta have a schedule. You have to find the methods that work for you. So I used a lot of different methods over the years, and my suggestion is don't just go onto some website, including my own. Don't just go and like read an article that says this is the best way to learn a language, and then just do that, and then it doesn't work for you, so you give up. If something doesn't work, then try another method. There's a lot of different methods that you can use to learn language. So mix through them, find the ones that work for you, and then continue to do them a lot and spend a lot of time at it.
Awesome.
Wow, that's a lot of good information. And I have one more question from Forfeit. And he goes, are there any particular parts of I Shall Seal the Heavens or Will Eternal you're extra proud of how you ended up translating them? Perhaps something that ended up being a mess when directly translated that had to be reworded and reformatted to better fit the English language?
Well, I feel like the chapter with the death of Ke Yunhai is I'm pretty proud of that. I feel like the reaction from the audience was pretty powerful, and I spent a lot of time on that. And I also had it TLC'd. I had the translation checked by Ren. I normally don't have him. In fact, that's the only part of the entire story that I remember where I actually asked him to check the entire, not just one chapter, but all 3 chapters. I wanted to make sure I got everything right. And I didn't really have to reword it necessarily, not significantly, but I really feel like I captured the essence of what he was trying to get the audience to feel. And in terms of other passages, I think a lot of those dramatic sort of like tearjerker chapters, I tend to spend more time on them. And then the other kinds of chapters, and there's a few of them throughout both stories. And there's one chapter coming up in A Will Eternal that I've already translated, but I haven't released yet, that falls into this category where there's like reuniting with friends and they're reminiscing and like like bittersweet, I guess is the right word. Those are the ones that I'm really most proud of, I think.
That's fair. Well, me personally, I am out of questions for you. Do we have anything else from Reddit, Richard?
I think we've covered basically everything on Reddit. There's a few like repeat questions, but I believe we covered everything. And I want to thank you, Deathblade, for coming on the show. I really appreciate you taking a chance on our tiny little show we have here.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm glad you guys are doing this. I hope that more people can learn more about our little Chinese web novel translation community through your guys' hard work.
But I think it works a lot more on you guys' hard work than ours. So thank you for that.
Is there anything you'd like to plug, Deathblade?
Oh, just my latest translation of Will Eternal is I for those of you who aren't following it, it's definitely a comedy. It has the feels and it has action, but it is definitely a comedy. And I think that Argon upped his game in the terms of the writing in a lot of different ways. I feel like he's taking a lot. I feel like he's taking his time with this novel more than any of the other novels. And I have a theory about that, which is, and not very many people know this, but his contract with Qilian ends relatively soonish. And I think, I could be totally wrong on this, but I think he might be trying to milk this story to the very end of his contract because he doesn't own all the rights to it. He owns most of the rights, but he doesn't own all of the IP rights to any of his stories. None of the authors do. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of the big name authors are leaving Qilian. And I think that he might be trying to make A Will Eternal his last Qilian novel so that he doesn't have to give up any more IP rights to further stories. So if he does do that, then I think he'll probably try to continue the story to around at least chapter 2000 or more. And so because of that, I feel like he's really taking his time. I think that the story doesn't really pick up until a few hundred chapters in, even though I think the first few hundred chapters are great. They're like hilarious and stuff, but you don't really start getting into the whole like secret plot element, that are in his novels. You don't get into that until you're into the few hundred chapters. So if you haven't picked it up yet, now's a good time to do a binge read and then follow along as we get into the meat of the story.
Like it's like I Shall Sail the Heavens if like 3 out of every 10 of Meng Hao's plans went horribly awry.
Yeah, it's man. I laugh when I read it. I laugh when I translate it, and I laugh when I edit it. It's a lot of fun. And incidentally, he specifically said to me and to Ren when we went to meet him that he wants this just to be a fun and relaxing novel. So the seriousness in his novels, the first one, Renegade Immortal, is, I haven't read it, but I haven't read very much of it, but based on everything I've ever heard, it's like kind of makes you want to commit suicide when you read it, but like in a good way. And then it the next one is a little different, and then I Shall Sail the Heavens has its own elements of tragedy and stuff, but I think he really wants this one to just be a lot more fun. And so I think over the course of the next couple years that it's going to take to translate it, I think we're all going to be in for a roller coaster, but mostly a fun roller coaster.
I'm super excited. It's been an incredible ride thus far. I'm very, very excited to both read and eventually cover it on this show.
Well, I'd love to come back.
We look forward to having you back.
I can reveal all the secrets of A Will Eternal. Hey.
All right. Well, we'll be in touch then. But other than that, yeah, like Richard was saying, thank you so much for coming on our show.
Absolutely. It was really fun. I had a blast.
You can follow us on Twitter at Tiger Coaster.
And you can follow Deathblade on Twitter at Deathblade. I Shall Sail the Heavens, ISSTH.
All right, Deathblade, I do have one final question for you. If you were to pick the next translator for us to interview, who would you recommend?
Okay, guys, give me a minute to think about this. 1 second. I kind of want to make a joke about good guy person, but I'm not gonna. All right, hold on a second.
Holy crap! That just blew my mind just now. I didn't realize GGP was good by first. Oh no!
Yeah, I think he needs to change his moniker to something else.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a really hard question. I would say Ren, but he's like so busy, and I think I have emails that I sent him like weeks ago that he still hasn't responded to. So don't get cut in front of me in line on that one. Actually, I would reach out to Et Voler because she works really hard on her own website and on Wuxia World. She's one of the most well-known female translators, and I think she's really knowledgeable about the industry, especially probably even way more than I am because of all the deals she does with the Chinese web novel sites and things like that. So that might be a good one.
Yeah, no, we'll put out feelers and see if we can get her to agree to come on the show. Thank you for your suggestion. But other than that, yeah, everybody go check out I Shall Seal the Heavens, A Will Eternal, and check out the incredible other stuff that Deathblade has put out, including all of the primer videos that he does, the videos that taught me how to pronounce things in Chinese novels, and all sorts of other fun things.
I know tonight I'm going to go and read 7 Killers because I didn't hear about that till just now, and I see it's completed in very little chapters.
Yeah, so it's really short, and it's cool. It's like a mystery sort of like thriller sort of story. You can read it in probably an hour or two. It's a fun read.
Awesome. And thank you guys for listening, and thank you for joining us, Deathblade.
I know we've thanked you like 3 times, but really.
Really? No, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Actually, here in China, it is now 1 p.m., and if I don't start translating my next chapter within the next 10 minutes, then I will not be able to finish my quota for today. So I actually do have to go and start working.
All right, sorry for holding that up, and don't blame us, guys. Bye-bye.
All right, see you guys.
Tiger Rollercoaster Productions. Tigers are scary. You try to get off.